Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Two people, same neighborhood, same broken schools, same impossible starting line, and one of them escapes, and one of them doesn't. And here's the part that nobody wants to say out loud. The one who escapes wasn't smarter, wasn't luckier, and honestly, wasn't even working harder. So what was the difference? Because if you've ever pushed yourself to the point of exhaustion, real exhaustion, the kind that follows you home, and still looked at your bank account feeling like nothing is moving, this story is going to land somewhere deep. Stay with me, because the answer has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with something most people never even think to look at, and once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Samuel was 29 years old, and he ironed other people's clothes for a living. 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, inside a commercial laundry facility where the air smelled like detergent and the heat never dropped below 90 degrees. He pressed shirts that belonged to lawyers, creased trousers that belonged to businessmen, folded linen that would end up on hotel beds he could never afford to sleep in. Let that breathe for a second. He was not a lazy man. Let that be absolutely clear, because lazy men don't survive 72-hour work weeks. Samuel was exhausted in the way that only truly hard-working poor people understand. The kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones, that makes your eyes heavy by 7 in the evening, that makes the very idea of doing something extra feel laughable. And every month, when his pay came in, it covered rent, it covered food, it covered the small amount he sent to his younger brother for school fees, and then it was gone. Not wasted, gone. There's a difference. And Samuel knew that difference more intimately than most people ever will. What haunted Samuel wasn't the poverty itself. It was the stillness of it. The sense that no matter how much he poured in, the walls around his life weren't moving. He'd tried studying at night once, bought a second-hand bookkeeping textbook from a street vendor, carried it home like it meant something. But after a full shift, his mind couldn't hold the words. They just slid off. He tried waking up earlier, but with no real plan anchoring those hours, he just sat there, tired, directionless, and eventually stopped. And this is where most people's stories end, not with a dramatic failure, not with a moment of visible collapse, just a quiet giving up that doesn't even feel like giving up. It just feels like being realistic. Samuel had started calling it that, being realistic. That's what happens when hope gets tired. It doesn't disappear, it disguises itself as logic. Then came the Thursday that cracked something open. His supervisor, a round-faced woman named Mrs. Adaze, 22 years at that facility, pulled him aside before his shift ended and handed him a small envelope. Samuel opened it. A pay adjustment notice. Not a raise, a reduction. The facility was cutting costs. His already thin salary was getting thinner. He stood in that parking lot afterward, envelope in hand, and for the first time in his adult life, Samuel didn't feel sad. He felt something sharper. The specific, clarifying pain of a man who finally sees, clearly, undeniably, that the road he's on doesn't lead anywhere different. It just keeps going, in the same direction, forever. He called his brother that night, said nothing about the pay cut, just asked quietly, "Do you think people like us can actually change our situation?" His brother, 19, still carrying that early hope, said, "Of course." Samuel hung up, and the silence after that call was heavier than anything he'd said out loud. The shift happened 3 weeks later, and it happened in the most ordinary way possible. Samuel was waiting for a bus at 6 in the morning, half asleep on a metal bench after a shift, when an older man sat beside him and opened a laptop. At 6 a.m., at a bus stop. Samuel watched him sideways. Not rudely, just curiously. The man was working on a spreadsheet, completely focused, completely unbothered by the noise of the waking city around him. Samuel finally said, "What are you working on so early?" The man looked up. No annoyance, no hesitation. "Same thing I work on every morning, my future." His name was Robert. He was 54, and he'd grown up, he explained, with less than Samuel had. And then he said the one quiet sentence that would rearrange Samuel's entire understanding of his own life. "The poorest people I know, and the wealthiest people I know, work the same number of hours. The difference is who owns their first 2 hours of the day." Samuel didn't fully understand it yet, but he couldn't stop turning it over. Who owns your first 2 hours? On the bus ride home, he mapped his own day honestly, maybe for the first time. He finished work, he commuted, he ate something. He collapsed into sleep until mid-afternoon. He woke up, prepared for the next shift, went back. His day started at 3 p.m., and it started in full service of someone else's schedule. His first 2 hours every single day belonged entirely to recovery. And here is the psychology that hides inside that reality, the thing almost every piece of money advice walks straight past. When your entire existence is structured around recovering from work rather than preparing for something better, your brain quietly accepts maintenance as the goal. You stop asking, "How do I grow?" You only ask, "How do I survive today?" Think about the people you know who've been working hard for 10, 15, 20 years and are somehow still standing in the same place. It's not that they're not trying. It's that every hour of their day is consumed by the present. And the present is a hungry thing. It will take everything you give it and still ask for more. Survival thinking, day after day, year after year, doesn't just shape your schedule. It becomes your entire financial identity. Not because you're weak, because your schedule trained your mind. And the moment you see that, everything looks different. Samuel made one decision that week. Not a dramatic overhaul, not a grand plan. One small, surgical change. He shifted his sleep. Instead of 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., he slept 6:30 to 11:30. 5 hours. Not perfect, but enough. And he protected noon to 2 p.m. like it was the most important meeting of his life, because it was. Not for rest, not for errands, for building. He found Robert again. He'd taken his number at the bus stop on instinct, and asked him one direct question. "If you had my situation and 2 hours a day, what would you learn?" Robert didn't hesitate. "Whatever skill the businesses around you are already paying for, that you could learn for free." That was the answer. Not poetic, not complicated, completely, ruthlessly actionable. Samuel chose bookkeeping. He still had that textbook, and added free YouTube tutorials on his phone. Simple, unglamorous, real. The first week was deeply unimpressive. He was tired. The material was dry. Nobody was cheering him on. He told no one what he was doing because he was afraid of looking foolish if he quit. And that fear, strangely, became useful. It kept him quiet. And staying quiet kept him consistent. Here's what nobody glamorizes enough about the early days of real change. Nothing was working yet. There were no signs, no results, no green shoots of progress. There was just a tired man at a small table watching accounting videos, while his neighborhood was still asleep. And he kept going anyway. That's not motivation. Motivation had come and gone 100 times in Samuel's life, and it had never been enough. This was different. This was a man who had finally connected his daily hours to his future in a way that felt undeniable. And that connection, that internal wiring, was enough to move him even when nothing else was. By the second month, something subtle shifted.
Samuel started waking a few minutes before his alarm. His body had quietly accepted the new rhythm. But more importantly, his mind had changed the way it talked to itself. Before, his first thoughts of the day were about survival, the shift, the bills, the tiredness. Now, his first thoughts were about what he was building. That shift, that tiny psychological reordering of what your brain reaches for first when it comes back online each morning, is worth more than any financial strategy you will ever find. Because your first thoughts shape your decisions. Your decisions shape your money. Your money shapes your options. Your options shape your entire life. Samuel hadn't earned a single extra dollar yet, but his mind was no longer a poor man's mind. And that was already irreversible. 3 months after that bus stop conversation, Samuel walked into the office of a small logistics company near his neighborhood. No degree, no formal resume. What he carried instead, 3 completed online certificates, a sample spreadsheet he'd built from scratch, organizing fictional inventory data, just to prove to himself and anyone watching that he could do the work, and the specific, unshakable confidence of a man who had shown up for himself every single day for 90 days straight. The owner, a practical woman who cared about capability, not credentials, gave him a part-time bookkeeping role. The pay was less than the laundry job at first. He didn't flinch. Within 4 months, it matched it. Within a year, it surpassed it. And sometime after that, he couldn't even tell you the exact date. He realized he hadn't thought about the laundry facility in months. It had just stopped being part of his story.
Here's what Samuel's story is actually about. Because it's not about waking up early. That's just the mechanism. It's about a psychological truth that quietly determines whether you break free from your financial situation or stay permanently inside it. The truth is this: poor financial outcomes are almost never caused by poor financial decisions. They're caused by a life structured entirely around the present, with no protected space left for the future. When every hour of your day is consumed by maintaining what you already have, you have no hours left to build something different. And without those hours, your skills don't grow, your options don't expand, your income doesn't change. It compounds on itself, quietly, year after year. It's not a money problem. It's a time problem. And the time problem is rooted entirely in psychology. The moment Samuel carved out 2 hours and pointed them at his future, not at recovery, not at anyone else's demands, not at the noise of the present, he had already changed his financial trajectory. The salary came later. But the change happened that first afternoon at noon, when a tired man sat down at a small table and opened a textbook nobody knew about. That was the moment.
So here is the only question that matters after hearing all of this. Look at your day, not your bank account, not your circumstances, and ask yourself honestly, who owns your first 2 hours? If the answer is your exhaustion, someone else's schedule, your phone, or nothing in particular, then you've just found your real money problem. And the fix isn't a budget. It's not an investment strategy. It's not working harder at the thing you're already doing. The fix is one protected window every single day, pointed at one skill that changes what you're worth. You don't need more hours. You need to stop lending your best hours to the present and start investing them in the version of yourself that actually has options. Samuel figured that out at a bus stop at 6 in the morning. The question is whether you figure it out right now or keep waiting for a moment that feels more convenient. That moment, I promise you, is never coming. The window is always now. The only question is whether you open it. And before you go, here's your one thing for today. Don't try to change your entire morning tomorrow. Just move one thing. Set your alarm 90 minutes earlier than usual. Open one free course on YouTube related to a skill you know the market pays for, and do nothing else for that first session, except show up. No pressure, no grand transformation speech to yourself, just show up once.
Because the psychology of real change doesn't need a dramatic moment. It needs one small proof that you can. One morning where you chose your future over your comfort. That single morning becomes the evidence your brain needs to believe the next one is possible. That's how Samuel started. That's how every real financial transformation quietly begins. Not with a revelation, but with a Tuesday morning where someone just decided to try.
If this made you think differently about your time, subscribe. Every week we bring you exactly this: real stories, real psychology, and the honest truth about why some people break free and others stay stuck. No jargon, no stock tips, just the human behavior behind money, told in a way that actually makes sense. We'll see you in the next one.